Hey there, 506 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL.
I can imagine what can be and be unburdened by what has been, you know?
What can be unburdened by what has been.
What can be unburdened by what has been.
What can be unburdened by what has been.
The least impressive presidential candidate any of us have ever known is making a run right now for that role. Will she succeed? How are things going? And why does it seem like it's all getting so much worse for her? Joining us now to discuss, David Strom is here. He's an associate editor over at Hotair, and he's writing today about Kamala Harris and what he refers to as the smell of desperation. David, good to have you back with us, sir.
It's always fun to be on my favorite radio show.
It's a blast having you here. You do detect something changing for Kamala Harris, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. We're in this sort of Schrodinger's presidential race because, on the one hand, Kamala Harris has absolutely collapsed as a candidate. I mean, she's covered in flop sweat. They're flailing. Everybody is starting to bail. And at the same time, it's not inconceivable that she could win. I mean, I think that the, 55, 45, 60, 40 for Trump is about right, which means 4 out of 10 times she could win. And that's because she has an incredibly high floor. The never Trumpers, the people who just absolutely despise the guy. Mm-hmm. But nobody is going to vote for Kamala Harris. I mean, these are the people who would vote for a lobotomized squirrel instead of Donald Trump.
Yes. But interestingly, the crew of people who would once vote against Trump just because he's Trump, that seems to have shrunk quite substantially. In fact, even on CNN, Harry Enton, their data analyst, he's been going over it and saying Donald Trump's never been more popular than he is right now. And that includes in the 2016 and the 2020 elections. What is changing in your view, David?
Well, I think there are a few things. Donald Trump benefits from his enemies. I think one of the things that has happened is they have thrown so much stuff at him, and he has withstood it all. It has looked so grossly unfair. They have committed so many hoaxes that have just fallen apart that it has broken through to some people where they're reconsidering Trump a little bit because they realize that they've been lied to so many times. There's just been this sort of the scales falling off the eyes. People realize, I mean, this actually corresponds with the Gallup data that just came out that the mainstream media's trust level with people has been just dropping like a rock and has been for years, but it's below Congress now. And Congress, famously, nobody likes or trusts. And even Democrats no longer trust the mainstream media. It's about 50% of Democrats. And so that has led to a sort of cautious reconsideration of Trump among some people, and also the willingness of respected people to come out and say, I think he's the right guy for the job. And there's just been this sort of cascade effect, when first it was Elon Musk, but now it's, some famous Democrats.
Well, and look, the Kamala campaign and even the Biden campaign when it existed, one of the demands they were making was that you ignore that Trump was president already. That's basically, in order for you to believe their version of Trump, you have to forget that he was ever president. And voters don't. I mean, I realize we have short memories and sometimes news cycles move so quickly and we forget what happened last week. But people do remember the relative flourishing of the Trump years versus what we're going through now.
Oh, that's absolutely true. I mean, by comparison, and just in objective terms, the Trump years were, relatively speaking, kind of a golden age, and the Biden years have just been this sort of one long sort of shallow depression for people in many ways, and so part of what's happened, if you watch the crazies at MSNBC or, Ann Applebaum in The Atlantic just said that he's worse than Mussolini, Hitler, and Stalin combined. And most people look at that and say, that is bizarre.
Yeah, why not throw in cancer or something? He's also worse than cancer. It's just the worst things that she can think of. He's a combo of all of them.
Yeah, well, and so you get this sort of weird effect, like, who really cares that Jack Smith is about to dump a lot more crap onto Donald Trump?
I know.
It's like, I've heard it all before. You've already tried to scare me. I'm done.
It's such a good point that it's impossible at this point really to define Trump in the minds of the voters because he's so well defined, and if anything, the image of him is improving. But Kamala Harris has given it the old college try again today. She's claiming that Trump is like Biden. He's exhausted. Take a listen to this.
Yes.
Let's see.
And that's apparently the excuse for why he's not doing interviews. And of course, he's not doing the CNN town hall. He refuses to do another debate. And, look, being president of the United States is probably one of the hardest jobs in the world. And so we really do need to ask if he's exhausted being on the campaign trail.
Now, President Trump was asked about this today, and here's the response that he gave.
Kamala Harris said she thinks you're exhausted. That's why you're canceling events. Are you exhausted?
What event did I cancel? I haven't canceled. She doesn't go to any events. She's a loser. She doesn't go to any events. She didn't even show up for the Catholics last night at the hotel. It was insulting. All they are is sound bites. So today I was at Fox and Friends at 7 in the morning. I then went to 2 different other appearances. I then made about 15 phone calls. I've gone 48 days now without arrest, and I've got that loser who doesn't have the energy of a rabbit. Let me tell you something. She should have been last night with the Catholics. So all they do is put out sound bites. Tell me when you've seen me take even a little bit of a risk. Not only am I'm not even tired. I'm really exhilarated. You know why? We're killing her in the polls because the American people don't want her. She didn't pass her bar exam. She's not a smart person. She's not a person that should represent our country.
There really is no question, David Strom, that Donald Trump is definitely working his tail off to earn this election.
Well, the idea that Kamala Harris is a judge of who has the mental capacity or the physical capacity to be the president of the United States, she's the person who told us that Joe Biden is sharp as a tack. So,
yes.
I mean, it really does take chutzpah. But of course, everything, it's almost predictable. Anything they say, take the opposite to the bank. And I'm not saying that as a partisan. If you just look at every single claim that they make and every single video clip that they put up, it's complete BS.
So you're saying Trump's not the guy who arrests his political opponents? Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, yeah, it's just bizarre. Here's a guy who has spent, the last year and a half in court because Democrats are just viciously trying to get him. They try to keep him off the ballot. They're suing everywhere. You've got Jamie Raskin saying that if Trump wins, we're still not going to certify the election.
Yep.
And then they turn around and talk about Donald Trump as the threat to democracy and the guy who's going to send the military after people. They're just bizarre liars. It's really desperate. It's pathetic.
One of the things I've discovered through the years about Democrats is when they become desperate, they become dangerous. And I am worried. This trend for Kamala Harris, her collapse as we're witnessing it. What does that mean? How do the next few weeks look? These final days ahead of the election. we all try to make predictions. Most of us are wrong. But what do you anticipate, David, as we approach Election Day?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, clearly you're going to have all the ballot lawsuits. You see the Justice Department literally trying to keep illegal aliens on the voting rolls. I mean, they're in court trying to keep illegal aliens on the voter rolls. You're going to see definitely shenanigans with ballots. I mean, we just found out that they discovered mail-in ballots that had been shoved into a sewer in California. We're going to see lots of that. And then, of course, you've got the outrageous rhetoric. And I worry about more violence. And, I'm not trying to ring alarm bells to frighten people, but we've already had 2 assassination attempts.
Yeah.
And they're ratcheting up the rhetoric even more. They're mentally unstable people out there. Democrats in particular have it's the mental illness party right now. Not all Democrats are mentally ill, but the Democratic Party, about half of them have been diagnosed with mental illness. We know that from studies. And so somebody could do something crazy. I'm worried about that.
Well, that second shooter in particular, Ryan Ruth, who tried to assassinate President Trump down in Florida on the golf course, he was pretty explicit about his political leanings and, in fact, was echoing the talking points of the White House on his social media, declaring that democracy is on the ballot. He's had the Biden-Harris bumper sticker on the back of his car, and really was a product of the delusions that the left have been preaching, which is really quite unfortunate. But you worry to what extent, how many more people are activated in that very toxic way by the out-of-control, destructive rhetoric that the left wields against Donald Trump and the people who would support him.
Well, let me ask you a basic question. It's very simple. And we've all done this in philosophy classes or just BSing with each other. If you had the opportunity to kill Hitler before he rose to power, would you do it? And most people answer, yes, I would, because he killed, tens of millions of people in World War II. It was a calamity of world historic proportions. Now, if you genuinely believe that Donald Trump is Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini combined, and therefore, could possibly be responsible for over 100 million deaths, what would you do?
Right. And then when Trump, you're right about how out of control the rhetoric is on the left. And then meanwhile, when President Trump raises the use of the National Guard in order to restore order in the United States, with very clear allusions to the events of 2020, when the left-wing rioters were destroying cities and National Guard was needed to try and bring some order back, when he says something like that, the way the left interprets it as is, oh, he's a threat to the country. Oh, he's going to arrest his political opponents. Or the women of The View, who straight up said this week that they're going to be bombed, that the Air Force is going to bomb the studio of The View. This is lunacy. And I'm over the people who are abusing their power in the media in order to spread these lies and to foment this chaos.
Yeah, I live here in Minnesota, and Tim Walz took too long to put the National Guard. It was like 4 or 5 days before they were on the streets. But even Tim Walz used the National Guard to restore order. Any governor would. And so this clearly isn't about policy. I am absolutely serious. This is mental illness. These are people who have become unhinged from reality. It is a form of psychosis. Go look up the definition of psychosis. It's disconnection from reality. And these people live in this alternate universe where Donald Trump is ready to put them in camps. And, the truth is, he even praises Gavin Newsom once Gavin Newsom says something nice about him. The guy is actually pretty easy to please.
Yeah.
He's not going to be putting anyone in camps. It's just not in his character.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of deception going on. I'm glad a lot of people are waking up to it, and they do it with the help of people like David Strom. David, thank you very much from Hotair. Always so good to talk to you, sir. Let's go to the phones. I've got Andy calling in from Washington, D.C., line 1. Hello, Andy. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hi, thank you very much. I want to take issue with your guest's prognostication about violence. I don't disagree that there'll be violence, but I think it'll be organized because that's the way the Marxist-Leninists have it planned. The people who are opposed to Trump do not want him to see him break up their stronghold of the bureaucratic state and their web of Marxist control. And that's why he's been hounded for so many years.
Mm-hmm.
So I expect to see that it would be organized if he wins, and not some mental health problem. I think that's out of bounds. That's ridiculous.
I don't actually think that your explanations are mutually exclusive. I think that the very movement you're describing, the very organization you're describing, takes advantage of people who are in mental despair. So I think those things can happen in concert. But let me add to the weight of what you're saying, Andy. You remember the secret history of the shadow campaign that saved the 2020 election? That was that piece back in Time where they were bragging about the coordinated effort to take the election and give it to Joe Biden. I want to revisit that in just a moment and reflect on this for you, Andy. Once we come back on the other side of the news, because in there's a lot of discussion about the foot soldiers. How do we coordinate when to deploy them? And they brazenly talked about it just 4 years ago. How will it manifest this time? Hold on. Hey, good afternoon to you. It's 5:35, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us today at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. To what lengths will the left go in order to prevent Donald Trump from first being elected president and then becoming president? Well, we've got a lot of evidence already in front of us that they're plotting everything right now. And that includes the fact that Jamie Raskin and company are very interested in stopping Trump from being counted on January 6th. They want to stage an insurrection on January 6th. That's been in the works for a while. I've gone over some of these items before, but there've been a number of headlines just this year alone. The Atlantic in February headline: How Democrats could disqualify Trump if the Supreme Court doesn't. They say without clear guidance from the court, House Democrats suggest they might not certify a Trump win on January 6th. The Associated Press also reported in January of this year, under the subheading, A Time Bomb for January 6, 2025, they say one possible outcome that the Supreme Court case that they were talking about presented was the prospect of unelected judges disqualifying the man dominating, who has already received hundreds of thousands of votes in the nominating process. But another potential nightmare is that if Congress is the only entity that can determine whether a presidential hopeful is indeed disqualified for engaging in, quote, insurrection, that it makes that determination on January 6, 2025, when required to certify a possible Trump victory in the presidential election. So the AP suggesting that course. The New Yorker also did it in February of this year. They said that, quote, some members of Congress may refuse to count electoral votes for him on the same grounds on January 6, 2025. So the left is hoping to successfully run an insurrection on January 6, 2025 to block the counting of the Electoral College votes for President Trump. That's one of their many backup plans to try and stop him. Now, it would help if Republicans have control of both the Senate and the House to prevent this nonsense from even going forward. That would be a big deal. But in case you're looking for more evidence that you have members of Congress openly talking about this, Democrats, here's Jamie Raskin saying it earlier this year.
Again, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient because what can be put into the Constitution can slip away from you very quickly. And the greatest example going on right now before our very eyes is Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which they're just disappearing with a magic wand, as if it doesn't exist, even though it could not be clearer what it's stating. And so, they want to kick it to Congress, so it's going to be up to us on January 6, 2025 to tell the rampaging Trump mobs that he's disqualified. And then we need bodyguards for everybody in Civil War conditions, all because the 9 justices, not all of them, but these justices who have not many cases to look at every year, not that much work to do, a huge staff, great protection, simply do not want to do their job.
Hear that? He said, so we're going to have to provoke a civil war in order to stop Trump. This is how deranged these people are. Yeah, it'll be civil war conditions. We're just going to block Trump from becoming president after the voters choose him. We'll just do that on January 6th of 2025. He says, as casually as you can possibly imagine. I think he was sitting down for some sort of like book chat or something, presumably for a book that has his name on it that somebody else wrote. But that was Jamie Raskin earlier this year. All right. So those are some of the kind of the late stage plans to try and stop Trump. What about the prospect of violence? One of the conversations that's come up this hour, I was talking with David Strom, and subsequently one of our callers making the point that they expect some degree, they're worried about some degree of violence, including from the mentally ill acolytes of the left and the organized components that put them out there. And if you go back to 2021, there's a now infamous piece that was written in Time by a reporter called Molly Ball, and the headline on that piece was "The Secret History of the Shadow Campaign That Saved the 2020 Election." And throughout it, it is a brazen relitigation of the secret effort that the left undertook to stop Trump from becoming president. So a lot of the contours became clear. They were bragging about it. We saved democracy. And in the piece, they detail the role that the AFL-CIO had as a central organizing committee, the central organizing element of the left's ambitions here to rig the election, and the role that they played in keeping foot soldiers either on or off the streets at any given time. In fact, as you go down, you get to, in the piece, you get to a section where they describe election night of 2020. And here's how it goes in the timepiece. The Liberal Alliance gathered for an 11 p.m. Zoom call. Hundreds joined. Many were freaking out. Quote, "It was really important for me and the team in that moment to help ground people in what we had already known was true," says Angela Peoples, director for the Democracy Defense Coalition. Hotair presented data to show the group that victory was in hand. While he was talking, Fox News surprised everyone by calling Arizona for Biden. The public awareness campaign had worked. TV anchors were bending over backward to counsel caution and frame the vote count accurately. The question then became what to do next. The conversation that followed was a difficult one, led by the activists charged with the protest strategy. Quote, "We wanted to be mindful of when was the right time to call for moving masses of people into the street," Peoples says. As much as they were eager to mount a show of strength, mobilizing immediately could backfire and put people at risk. Protests that devolved into violent clashes would give Trump a pretext to send in federal agents or troops, as he had over the summer, and rather than elevate Trump's complaints by continuing to fight him, the alliance wanted to send the message that the people had spoken. So the word went out. Stand down. Protect the Results, that's the name of the group, announced that it would, quote, "not be activating the entire national mobilization network today, but remains ready to activate if necessary," end quote. On Twitter, outraged progressives wondered what was going on. Why wasn't anyone trying to stop Trump's coup? Where were all of the protests? Hotair credits the activists for their restraint. Quote, "They had spent so much time getting ready to hit the streets on Wednesday, but they did it," end quote, he says. Quote, "Wednesday through Friday, there was not a single Antifa versus Proud Boys incident like everybody was expecting. And when that didn't materialize, I don't think the Trump campaign had a backup plan." That's the left. So let me just put a finer point on it. They controlled Antifa is the concession they're making here. And one of the things they were concerned about was once they deploy their foot soldiers, things might get very violent. And as a PR concern at the time, let's just hold everybody back for now because we see this headed in the right trajectory at the moment for Biden to become president. If things start going south, though, we're sending out the foot soldiers. This is what they said in their own accounting of the events of 2020. So to our last caller's point about the role that the left plays in terms of organizing its most lunatic, violent activists, they've bragged about that. That's a feature, not a bug. It's like, well, let's hold them back for now. We can't have violence at the moment. But if Trump's winning too much, maybe we'll send him out. So we've spent a lot of the show today kind of mocking Kamala and her campaign, acknowledging that there's a panic setting in on the left, clearly, that you have major Democrat Senate candidates who are right now literally advertising that they're closer to Trump than they are to Kamala because they see the writing on the wall. You've got a Senate candidate saying that she'd rather you, in Michigan, that she'd rather you split ticket vote for Trump and her. She's a Democrat. These are all clear indicators that the numbers aren't working. The math ain't mathing for the left. And that Trump is in a very good position right now if it is left up to the voters. But at the same time, you do get nervous about these final weeks. Because as the picture looks more and more awful for the left, what sort of awful things will they undertake in order to ensure Donald Trump doesn't make it all the way to the finish line? To make it so that they can salvage the disaster that is the Kamala campaign. She's taken to screaming on the stump today. She's just letting it out. It is an awful look for her. But that's where she is now. That's where she is. She's literally shouting on the stump now. It's like she's having her Howard Dean moment. Her Hillary Clinton, why aren't I 50 points ahead moment. It's happening before our very eyes. So we'll keep tracking all of this. One other thing I wanted to mention with some gratitude. I got a message from one of our listeners, Katie. Thank you, Katie, who directs me to an article today by PJ Media, written by Victoria Taft. And the headline on their piece is, where do these mobs come from? We have an answer. And it gets to some of this, the organized nature of some of the mobs. And Victoria writes today that Kamala Harris bussed in, quote, supporters to a rally in what looked like an obvious effort to make her campaign look bigger than it is. Women dressed in, quote, handsmaid tail garb picketed in front of U.S. Supreme Court justices' homes to pressure them into changing their minds, insurrection style after the Dobbs decision was leaked. Democrat operatives sent agent provocateurs to Trump rallies to try and start fights while in line and disrupt his speeches in 2016. In 2008, at a Hillary Clinton speech, a couple of guys heckled her with, quote, iron my shirts. And Victoria says, who are these people? Don't these people have jobs to go to? Where do they come from? And she goes down the list, and she points out that she's been receiving, as other members of the media have been receiving, publicity emails from a group called Crowds on Demand. And she spoke to the founder and the CEO, a guy called Adam Swart. And she says he doesn't hide what he does. She said she got a press release from his PR folks a couple of months ago. And PJ Media spoke with him. She says that his company does a bit of everything. Crowds on Demand promises crowds, quote, to move forward a healthcare, financial, energy, or other social initiative. We can organize rallies and get media attention for your causes and candidates. If you need to hire protesters, we can get a crowd on the street, sometimes within 24 hours' time. They can also, quote, staff city council meetings. Quote, if you need speakers to present at a council meeting, we can provide talented and well-spoken individuals to advocate for the cause. You know, actually, as I'm reading through this list, and this is great stuff from PJ Media, it reminds me, if you work in Washington, D.C., have you ever noticed the protests, like the union protests that'll happen out in front of some random business? People will be walking in a circle carrying signs, and they claim that they're protesting the working conditions and it's a labor contract dispute. And one of the features of those protests is oftentimes those people are merely hired to do that. They're not actually workers at the company that they're marching in front of. It's pretend. They're actors. They're hired. They're hired. They're paid. Which goes right back to the point I was making before. The AFL-CIO played a central role in dispatching protesters, antagonizers, agents provocateur on the streets in 2020, and then held them back the evening of the 2020 election. And so this idea that they would be hiring AstroTurf people to go out there, paying people to cause chaos. Well, it's consistent with the way the left does this. They routinely run AstroTurf campaigns. They do it to harass members of Congress. They send out form letters. Ask any congressional office what that's like, where you get the same email a million times over. It's the same exact language, sent from a million different email addresses. Oh my gosh, we're getting all of this feedback. Somebody tell the congressman, this is not good. And it's just one group. It's AstroTurf. It's nonsense. Paid for nonsense. Meant to give the appearance of a groundswell. And so are there organizations out there who are dedicated to pretending to represent, for a price, some sort of movement in the United States? Yes, there are. And PJ Media with a good report on it today. Plenty of evidence for it in the past. Lots of bragging on the left about how they deploy these people. So all I'm saying is keep your head on a swivel. I mean, this campaign, if it's a fair one, the election is looking like it's headed in the right direction. If it's a free and fair election, we're headed in the right direction. But don't put it past any of these guys to use shenanigans in order to achieve their outcomes, their desired outcomes. And that includes, did you see today, Google? Google is banning advertising related to politics after the election. Now, why would you do that? Why would one of the biggest tech companies on the planet, certainly one of, if not the biggest advertising generating revenue company on the planet, why would they ban political ads after the election's over, right? Presumably, there would be no political ads after the election's over. Why would you run a political ad if it's a moot point? The answer to that is Google doesn't want anybody to question the results of an election and use advertising to do it. So even if you have explicit evidence of an election that's been meddled with, legitimate concerns about the way an election is conducted, if a political action committee comes along and says, hey, we need to audit the way that election was conducted, which, by the way, is your right to do as an American, Google is already announcing we will not provide any space for anybody to raise any questions at all after the election. Now, in what world does that increase confidence in our elections for Google to make that announcement? It doesn't. In fact, it instantly makes you suspicious. It instantly does that. And that's what they announced this very week. That, sorry, no political ads after the election, which is obviously designed to prevent organizations from using Google advertising to raise legitimate concerns about the way the election was conducted. So, President Trump's been saying, make this thing too big to rig. I know Republicans are as energized as I've ever seen them. A lot of promising things going on right now, but never underestimate the left's capacity for shenanigans. By any means necessary is clearly the way so many of them operate. It's fine. All right, let me go to line 5. I got Rick in Reston. Go ahead, Rick. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Yeah, hey, Vince. Thanks for taking my call. Great show as always.
Thank you.
I wanted to just add something on to the Jamie Raskin quotes that you were playing a moment ago. I mean, it's really amazing. Raskin reminds me of the crazy drunk guy in the bar who is just so erratic that he is going to get his way. Everybody else is just afraid of him because there's no accountability for the crazy drunk guy in the bar.
No, that's right. The crazy guy at the bar, you have to cut him off and get the bouncer. That's the way you handle this. Eject that dude. There's quite a few of them, quite a few Jamie Raskins who need to be kicked out of the bar. Rick, thank you. Sorry for the short call, but I really appreciate it. Excellent point. Hey, have a fantastic weekend, would you? Say your prayers. Get out to vote. Love your country. It's a great one. The great one, Mark Levin, is up next.